great evening to have a book discussion, and thank all of you for coming. And my theory is that once you get started, then you'll be overwhelmed by the multitude, so we'll get started. So again, welcome. And this evening, as you know, that we're going to discuss not what we were, the changing South by James E. Bell. Originally, Dr. Bell was going to be with us, but he called a few days ago, actually a week or so ago, and indicated that he was having some health challenges and he would not be able to come. But we're going to soldier on in spite of the absence of Dr. Bell. Let me just parenthetically point out that the activities this year sponsored by the Hagen Institute, we are dedicating these activities to the life and work of Professor Attorney Isaiah Madison. Some of you know that Professor Madison was the original attorney in the Ayers case. So part of the benefits that we have here at Jackson State and at Valley and Alcorn started out with the Ayers case back in actually 1973, because not only was Isaiah Madison the lead attorney in the Ayers case, he was the initial chair of the Black Mississippians Council on Higher Education. So this year we are expressing our gratitude to the life and work of Isaiah Madison. And come April 18th, we're going to sponsor, along with the Department of Political Science, the inaugural Isaiah Madison Memorial Symposium on Higher Education. That's going to be over in the Dolly E. Robertson building. So we are delighted that you're here. We selected this book in part because we just held the national elections on November the 6th. And this is timely because it's talking about the South, how the South has changed, and maybe how the South has not changed. But it's a timely discussion. And let me just also point out that James Bell was actually my classmate at Rush College. He is a retired governmental official. He worked as a government bureaucrat for more than 25 years, and he ended up on the faculty at 2 different universities in Missouri. And now he's retired, living the life of Riley in Atlanta, Georgia, and writing books. This is his 2nd book since he's been retired. Originally, he was from Clarksdale, Mississippi, a graduate of Higgins High School, Rush College, and Michigan State University. So, looking forward to having this very robust discussion. I was sort of thinking about the South and the way that the election had an impact on where we are, and all of us know that that the president carried 2 southern states. He carried Virginia, and eventually he carried Florida. And he came very close again in North Carolina. And I was just looking at some of the percentages in the southern states, and it says something about, you know, how the South has changed, but then how the South hasn't changed. President Obama got 44% of the vote in Mississippi, 38% of the vote in Alabama, 41% of the vote in Louisiana, 48% of the vote in North Carolina that he won 4 years ago, 44% of the vote in South Carolina, 39% of the vote in Tennessee, 41% of the vote in Texas, 33% of the vote in Oklahoma, and 37% of the vote in Arkansas. And Oklahoma also gave him the lowest percentage of the vote in 2008 too, so things haven't changed much in Oklahoma. But what I thought was instructive is that he received 44% of the vote in Mississippi, 44% of the vote in South Carolina. And I know prior to the election there was a fairly statewide organized voter registration campaign in Mississippi by the NAACP and some of its partners. And if we really examine the vote in Mississippi, especially the black vote, if we organize systematic voter registration campaigns, perhaps in South Carolina too, but especially in Mississippi, I mean, we could fare much better statewide, national elections, if we could get the same kind of turnout. And if we got the same kind of turnout in 15% of the white vote, we could really have a statewide impact. We could actually elect more Democrats, and there is a possibility that we could even elect a black Democrat statewide. I mean, a tad ambitious, but that's a possibility. But it just goes to show that how voter turnout can have a real impact if you put forth the effort. But at any rate, we have two distinguished gentlemen and scholars here that's going to discuss Dr. Bell's book this evening, and we're going to start with the senior scholar, Dr. Gary Crosby here, who is a political science graduate, received his doctorate about a year or so ago, and is now program director of Type 3 programs in the Office of Student Affairs. And Gary is going to share his views on Dr. Bell's book, and after Gary, we'll hear from Michael March, who is a graduate student in political science and who works at the Haim Institute, and he took a leave of absence for 2 months from Haim Institute, decided to come back, so we're glad to have him back working at the Haim Institute.
Glad to be here.
Thank you very much. So first, we're going to hear from Dr. Crosby, and then from our friend Michael. Dr. Crosby.
Thank you, Dr. Mack.
You're welcome, sir.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I would like to first thank the Haim Institute for inviting me to serve on this panel to discuss Dr. Bell's book, Not What You Were, The Changed and Changing South. The title says a lot to me, and when I read the book, I read it from the viewpoint, from two viewpoints actually. First, as a political scientist, since I am a 2005 graduate of the political science program, then as a community development and housing specialist, which is what I got my PhD in. So from those two viewpoints, I looked at the political impact of individuals in the South, as well as the impact on housing and economic development, again, from a political standpoint. I would first like to say that Dr. Bell, the story is very compelling. The book opens with a historical overview of the relationship between the slave and the slave owner, the sharecropper and the landlord, so to speak, as well as how plantation owners wanted to modernize the plantation, and as a result, and when I read the line, for the most part changed the course of history, because with the modernization of the plantation came big machines, and African Americans at that particular time would either be put out of work or forced into another employment field that they may not have wanted to do. So that's a little opener for me. A key line that jumped out the book to me, and I'll read it if you all don't mind, was that the author around the middle of the book painted a picture of how the South and the North could come together, but ultimately they would have to come together through politics, through music, through through sharing of social structures, if you so will. And he says, across the South, white politicians who had once sworn to the citizen councils are to the Klan now visited black churches and locked arms with ministers and their congregations to sing, "We Shall Overcome." How powerful is that? How powerful is that? Here you're talking about individuals who fought most of their lives to segregate or keep the South segregated. And they're going into black churches, 9 times out of 10 politicians, and they're holding hands, locking hands with African Americans to sing, "We Shall Overcome." Now here's the funny part to me. As African Americans, I can understand why we're singing "We Shall Overcome." But as Caucasian Americans or European Americans, it was difficult for me to kind of grasp. I put that around my psyche, put my psyche around that. But I thought that line was a eye opener in the book for me. The author also talked about the migration, not only the black migration, but the migration of whites out of the South to the North and the West. As we all know, when African Americans left the South, changed the dynamics of the social setting, economics, because again, they took their skills to the North, East, and West, some of us. But it also changed the political scheme of things. And when I say that, I mean because when you had African Americans living on modern plantations, for example, the Mississippi Delta, and he talks about this in the book, how they were more than likely forced to vote if they were allowed to register to vote for a political figure. And so with them migrating to the North, or migrating out of Mississippi, those votes went with them. So the landlord on the plantation had no control over these votes once they left his plantation. Another thing that jumped out to me, how he discussed how Fannie Lou Hamer, for the most part, brought national attention to some of the racial injustices in the state of Mississippi. At her testimony with the, help me out, Dr.
FDP.
Yes, Freedom Democratic Party, exactly. Her testimony, her famous line, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." And for the most part, she was talking about how the racial injustices in the state of Mississippi became too much to bear. And I just want to pause here and ask the audience, and this is something that I do when I read a book, I like to get feedback on it. When we talk about the change and the change in South, and I know you may not have read the book, but what does that mean to you as an individual? Especially with the election or re-election of President Obama, and Mississippi giving President Obama 44% of the vote. What does that mean to you? Yes, sir.
To me, it's said that we, in a race, we're in the middle of the race. We're not who we want to be, but we're not who we used to be. So it's kind of like, we're making progress, but of course, you need to make progress fast enough. Yes.
Who else would like to join that? The change and changing South, not what we were. What does that mean to you? Yes, Dr. Gill.
One of the things I saw is after this election, they did a study of the tweets that came out after the election, looked at social media commentary, and they were charting, they did kind of a chart of the racist tweets. And it was coming out of the South. I mean, the number 1 was Alabama, number 2 was Mississippi, and it's a chart that shows where the hot spots were for those. And it's the same location. So it is that in some areas things are changing, because I would argue that percentage mirrors the large size of the black population within the South. The question is, I think, how much are whites changing in this area?
And you bring up a good point, and this is kind of off topic of the book, but the riot at Ole Miss, that behavior is learned 9 times out of 10 at home. So as you know, are we really changing? Although that's a small percentage of the campus population. After the election, I went and I looked at the state of Mississippi county-wise to see in which counties the president carried. surprising to me. I have relatives in Jasper County. Jasper County is about 39% African American, and he carried Jasper County. Now the shock with Jasper County is the level of poverty, lack of education, a failing school system, and Dr. Bell actually discussed how politics can impact the level of education, housing in a rural area or even an urban area for that matter. So again, I thought the book was very compelling. And reading it, it opened my eyes to some of the things that I never thought of, more so the lower class whites, which is it's an area less studied. And so, he discussed in the book how, and I'll put it into my own words, paraphrasing it, but during slavery, how a white American without slaves was possibly worse than slaves. And to be American and white, it was a must that you own slaves. And so today, with the whole notion of, I think we're at 34 states requesting secession from the United States based on the election, that says a lot. It really says a lot. I think we still have a long way to go, and Dr. Bell, he points that out, that as individuals, we're constantly changing. We can always have room for improvement, but it's going to take us working together for the betterment of everyone involved to really make things change at the moment. So at this time, I'll yield.
And let's give that. First of all, I would just like to thank the Hammers Institute for allowing me to come on board with the Institute once again. I took a hiatus, attempted to work in the real world while going to college, and I realized that that's kind of tough to do when you're taking Dr. Digital. So I wouldn't suggest that anyone do that. But I am happy to be back with the Hammers Institute. The Hammers Institute definitely gave me a lot of, insight into some of the things that Dr. talks about in the book. I actually read this book in combination with another book that I'm reading in Dr. Digital's class, Two Reconstructions is the name of it. And basically what that guy argues in that book is that, he argues in that book is that the South went through two Reconstructions, and he compares the Reconstruction period after the Civil War that I'm sure everyone's familiar with what he would consider the Reconstruction that happened during what people would call the Civil Rights Movement, or the modern Civil Rights Movement. And so I tried to compare these two books together to see what James Bell was going to offer new in terms of the South, the American South, and how it came to be what it is today. And so I felt that his central question, I think he put it in the intro, I can't remember what page number it was on, but he said, how does one individual group make the emotional and mental adjustments of fully changing from a master-slave relationship when there are discernible physical characteristics to which there are long-standing animosities of superior and inferior status attached? And I know that's a mouthful, but he's answering this question throughout this book with the considerations of an economist, of a historical economist. And I am not very well versed in economics, but I think he kind of makes it plain to the layman reader. And it's interesting the way that he mixes his, I would consider, because he's not afraid to put his normative worldview in the book, but it seems that he's very conservative in terms of economics, in terms of how much the role of the government, in terms of trying to alleviate poverty and other things like that. But he is not afraid to talk about, social. He seems to be very social liberal in terms of talking about slavery and the effects of it, even that have lasted even today. And some examples of that you can see in chapter 1, where he's talking about emancipation, the emancipations of African Americans from slavery, changing the planter-labor relationship. And so the white landowner realized, even after blacks were emancipated, that blacks had no land, they had no power, they were poor, and so he realized that we could take advantage of it. He realized that African Americans need a job, and so a lot of African Americans chose to go back to the plantation and become, that's where the industry of sharecropping came out. Another thing that he points out, and these are examples of how the government wasn't there in terms of protecting African Americans after Reconstruction. And I could talk all day about Reconstruction, but I'm trying to focus in on what he was talking about in the book. They realized that they could still depend on black labor because they were free, broken landers. And as Frederick Douglass famously said, they left the plantations with nothing but the dust under their feet. And so they also took advantage of poor white farmers. And this is something special that I think Dr. Crosby raises about the book. I think he's really trying to point out, the plight of poor whites during Reconstruction and afterwards in terms of how they were marginalized politically and economically, in the state of Mississippi and throughout the South. And that's something that I think a lot of historians kind of miss when they write about Southern history, is the fact that poor whites were suffering also. He also points out the fact that cotton ruled even more after slavery. And so the perception would be, if you didn't really know much about Southern history, that after the Civil War, the cotton industry kind of fell off. But he points out, and he has a lot of evidence to support it, that the cotton industry went, it boomed after Reconstruction. And it's because of those other things that I was just talking about earlier. And so he goes on to talk about part of the Civil War's goal was to Yankeeize the South. A largely uneducated, low-wage, low-skilled industry, underinvestment in education, etc. And so after the war, this continued because it was rooted in a racially divided labor market. And I think what he's trying to point out is we're still going through the struggle today. I know in one of the classes I took in the political science department, I think it was Dr. Orris, he's always talking about how the Delta is still largely in the same situation that it was economically after Reconstruction. I have to point out before I get there, though, that he does do a good job of talking about civil rights issues. He, in particular, points out Fannie Lou Hamer's speech at the Democratic National Convention and its effects on changing the Democratic Party. And I really do appreciate that. But he also talks about how the civil rights movement kind of splinters after that convention, because a lot of middle-class Mississippi blacks didn't want to see a poor black woman up there talking about, the plight of blacks in Mississippi. They felt like, that's her problem. She has this economic argument that she, had going. That, she felt like blacks in Mississippi were missing out on, the American pie, and these middle-class blacks didn't feel the way. And so that kind of splinterized, I think is the word that he used, the civil rights movement towards the end. And so, those are some of the big points that I kind of got from what he was saying. Towards the end of the book, he also talks about how the changing demographics of the South have kind of changed the way that our political landscape is going to be in the future. I guess you can kind of say he's a visionary, and he's got a very optimistic vision of the future in terms of the American South because of these changing demographics, which is a part of the reason why Jasper County, largely voted for Obama in their last election. And so I think in terms of this book, it's going to be interesting to see how the Republican Party realigns and tries to reach out to these new minorities that we see that, throughout this book, he talks about how they've been kind of excluded and suppressed. And so now it's a new age, and they're going to have to figure out how they're going to appeal to blacks, poor whites, other minorities that have historically not been a part of this new alignment of the Republican Party. So those are my comments.
before I sort of throw it open to general discussion, let me ask the two of you. James Bell sort of talks about the status of course, African Americans in the South, and the status of African Americans. Talks about the status of essentially poor whites or low-income whites in the South. But and you can sort of pick up this notion that I think a lot of us, in one sense, think about, but probably don't hold much hope for the possibility of a coalition developing between African Americans in the South and low-income whites as a way to liberate the South in one sense. Do either of you think that's a possibility 20 years from now, or 30 years from now, or 50 years from now?
I don't think it's just a possibility. I think in the book Two Reconstructions by Vallejo, he points out that after Reconstruction, there were efforts to make coalitions between poor whites and blacks. And so I definitely think that could happen after Reconstruction. That's something that could definitely happen in the future. If we can get poor whites to look at their interests and not at these conservative, ideological interests that the conservative or Republican Party were trying to throw at them to rid them off from looking at the economic interests. I think that would definitely happen.
Just to add to that, I think it's happening now. I think it's happening now, and it's evident in the reelection of the president. People are tired of being poor. Simply put, people are tired of being poor. And so, middle class blacks and poor whites are coming together, and they're voting for change. And that's what Obama ran on. In the first election, change. And as part of that, we have to look at economics. We have to look at finances. And that's key to bringing the two groups together, I believe. It's not easy to be poor and retirement. So that's the question. I think it's going on. I think 20 years from now, we may see a different South altogether.
Let's see, 20 years from now, I don't think so. You never know. But now, in light of what you indicated, and think about what Dr. Durdall said. She said the #1 tweet came out of Alabama, and Mississippi was second.
Right.
And they were defined as sort of racist.
What they did is they did searches for, they used some specific racialized terms connected with President or Obama, and then they tracked where those originated from. So not when people just retweeted them, but where did they originate from, and they kind of found where the hot spots were. I can forward anybody that they did a chart of it. It's actually pretty cool. And I mean, that they can do that now. Not that people were doing it, but that they can see now. I mean, it's really interesting what that technology allows you to kind of drill down. And it's the traditional southern places, and then those states that are isolated and white. So North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, I mean, those kinds of locations. But most of it was in the South, the heaviest, most intense.
And of the 11 Confederate states of the Old South, remember the president only carried 2, right? Florida and Virginia. And the lowest percentage of the vote that the president received, can anybody guess what state it came from? Lowest percentage of the vote? Of the southern states overall, but overall in the country. Can anybody just take a guess? What was the state where you received fewest votes, fewest percentage of the vote, lowest percentage? Utah. Okay. Utah, and the next state was Wyoming. Yeah. So, but then those states are not heavily populated, so that doesn't help too. But okay. So this the Tea Party is primarily a Southern-based phenomenon. And if we look at what's happening across the South, you can count maybe on one hand, maybe a hand and a half, white Democrats that are still elected that serve in the Congress from the South. I'm exaggerating a tad, but you can see what is happening. I mean, in Mississippi, we have one Democrat. In Alabama, maybe 2 out of 9 electoral votes, 1 Democrat out of 6 electoral votes in Mississippi. But at any rate, I really admire your optimism, and I hope you're right. But you know, okay. Questions and comments? Yes, sir. Right
I
ahead.
would have the coalition amongst the blacks and poor whites. I would look at that as being the civil rights movement itself. And as far as with it getting better, I'm kind of like, no, I don't see it getting better. But what I see is I see the Hispanic population growing. And I see the coalition that needs to occur needs to be amongst the minorities and the poor whites. But you still do have, in Dr. Samuel's class, we discussed like you have some poor whites that vote against their own interests. And they did it this election. They're going to keep doing it. Like they're stuck in their ways. You know, I think that's the best way to describe it. But with the new growing Hispanic community and the black community that's already here and becoming more educated, I think we showed in this election that we have more power than we actually knew that we had.
So,
We don't really need.
why do you think whites vote against their best economic interests?
Because a lot of the voting is ignorant voting. They're not voting with their head, they're voting with the feet.
Oh, okay. All right.
You know
Okay.
what that means. What do you
I mean, just like Dr. was saying earlier,
Yeah.
when you had landowners telling the sharecroppers how, you had like the same thing happening now, but instead of landowners and sharecroppers, it's the boss of the business and the person that works for the business. I mean, if you work for a business and you may see Romney and Ryan stickers, but you don't see Obama Biden stickers, they will have to come out and tell you who to vote for, but you can just about gauge where they stand. So I mean, it's kind of subliminal message. I guess you could
Well,
say.
there were a number of business leaders who out now said, we'll be firing people if Obama wins, and our business will go under if Obama wins. If you want to keep your job, you need to look around. I mean, that was,
But that was not just in the South. I mean, that was said in other places in the country too. So not just the South. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
One comment I would have about, whites vote, poor whites voting against their own interests, I kind of believe is to keep the status quo as keeping, the white man in power. As far as a lot of whites in general would not like to see African Americans succeed in anything. That even goes against them staying poor or going down under even more. So I feel that's more so the reason why a lot of poor whites still vote against their needs, in my opinion.
Yes.
one thing the labor movement argued, and this is clear back in the 20s.
I was talking here.
I'm sorry, one of the things the labor movement argued, and this is back in the 20s, is that for poor whites, their whiteness was often more important than their income. So if they were equally poor and they had no property and they had no money, at least they had their whiteness that gave them privilege somewhere.
What was that?
And so their fear was if they gave up that privilege that came with whiteness, they would have absolutely nothing. There's actually a really interesting poem that came out at that time about this. I don't have it with me, but and so I mean I think that while I don't think poor whites today would define it as their whiteness, I think it's the same principle. They're just less aware of that whole lot. If you don't feel like you have economic privilege, they're going to look for privilege
Somewhere else, exactly.
Well, you know, I think if you look and think about the role of the civil rights movement in the South, obviously where good bit of the movement took place in the American South. And one would have thought, at least I did, you know, as a young person in the movement, I thought that the civil rights movement would have had a greater impact on the South in terms of the work that we did in the South. But clearly, if you look at the last presidential vote, one really wonders, because I think in the 18 to 35 white demographic, Obama carried that demographic across the country, except in the South. It's the only place. You know, he received 39% of the white vote. But the 18 to 35 demographic nationwide, except the South, he carried that white secular population, but not the South. So Gary or someone pointed out that this coalition, clearly I think if there's any hope, it is amongst younger whites. But then if you have the example, the recent example at the University of Mississippi, which is not symptomatic of the entire South, but it received national attention, that 400 white students gathered on the campus of the University of Mississippi to protest the re-election of the president. And that didn't happen at Delta State, or at least it didn't make the news. It didn't happen at Mississippi State, but at the University of Mississippi, where they were celebrating 50 years of integration of the University of Mississippi and the admittance of James Merritt. So the irony of that campus and what happened. Yes?
But one positive thing I thought about that was the institution's immediate response to it. I mean, immediately they came out against it. I think that is a finding of civil rights.
And that's great.
That the structure's changed, and then 4,000, or was it twice, I think it was almost 4,000 students and community people marched against the drunk kids in the middle of the campus who were burning the Obama signs and taking pictures of each other doing it. And so even though you still have that group who are going to have this diehard, if the structures are starting to recognize the danger, at least whether they feel it or they know the social pressure to be against it, that's a change. I mean, that's a serious change that I think we can look at the civil rights movement and thank it for.
And I don't know whether it's true or not, and you're exactly right. I mean, the response to that protest was the Candlelight Vigil. But also, it's my understanding that in the Candlelight Vigil, and maybe maybe it's appropriate, but there were very few black students that participated in the Candlelight Vigil. According to someone who lives in Oxford, that there were not any black students in the vigil. And according to another person who lives in Oxford, I'm just listening to all this, there were 2 black students in the vigil. So I don't know. So either it was 0 blacks or it was 2. Yeah, okay. But you're right. They had the vigil, and that was a positive response. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
To the comment that you had about the middle of the book, you were saying that the politicians go into the churches. You said that it brought to mind. Dr. Samuels had us to read the Ballad of the Book by Brother Malcolm X. And he mentioned in that how politicians they do that in order to get votes. But once they get back into Washington, you don't see the action that you expect from them. So I mean, I think just like you were saying, as far as them singing "We Shall Overcome," it's kind of ironic for us to sing it. We know what it means, we know where it comes from, but for them to sing it is kind of like, I think that we should just be more demanding of those politicians instead of just holding hands and singing. We have to demand more, or at least select the politicians from our neighborhood.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's kind of a problem within the African American communities within the U.S. I feel as if they hope so much and they hope this change and hope that change, but there's rarely any action, to hold the presidents or the governor or mayor accountable for their action. They say they're going to do this, they get elected, and do the complete opposite. I feel as if the community as a whole should hold these people accountable for their actions and not just sit around and complain, oh, he didn't do this, he didn't do that. Well, what are you going to do about it? That's the question that should be asked within the communities, and that's what's not going on within these communities.
Well, you know, the accountability occurs if you can get people registered to vote, right? So, in terms of electoral politics, I mean, if you can penalize or throw a rascal out if he or she doesn't vote the right way. But we know what has happened in the American South is that the 1965 Voting Rights Act clearly helped to change the South, as Dr. Bell talks about. But on the other hand, you can see that when it comes to policy issues of policy, the Southern voting pattern really hasn't changed. Now, in terms of services, you know, the most right-wing of the congresspersons from Mississippi. I mean, if you need to renew or start your Social Security, or if you have a welfare issue, or you have a housing issue, you can get somebody in that office to assist you. But they still vote a certain way that votes against the best interest of the people they represent. So, it's amazing. I mean, you can get these same politicians who come and saying, "We should all come with you." They will shake your hand, they will smile at you, and they will pat you on the back, and y'all have a great conversation, but they will still go to Washington and vote the way the conservative right-wing line. And I think that is what we're witnessing. I mean, the demeanor, I mean, the lack of hostility that you encounter in so many places in the South has changed. Although, let me tell you, living in Jackson is not like living in Dewdrop, Mississippi. It's still different. Okay. But, you know, I think there very well may be the ensuing of a third Reconstruction, because we really haven't talked about voter suppression at all. And, you know, we know that before the Supreme Court, there are some people challenging Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So the Supreme Court this session will hear that challenge. In 2006, the Voting Rights Act was renewed. I mean, I just simply thought...
Republican president.
Excuse me?
By a Republican president.
In a bipartisan Congress.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I really thought that issue was sort of behind us, in one sense. But now you have, coming out of the South, these southern states, some of these southern states arguing that Section 5 is outdated, that was during the era of Jim Crow. But on the other hand, you have voter suppression, voter ID challenges in Mississippi, Minnesota, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know. I mean, we still have a fight on our hands. I mean, I just never imagined that we would revisit voter ID or the poll tax or ways to suppress the vote in the South in 2011. But we're faced with that. So that's why it seems to me that getting people registered to vote and forming viable coalitions in places like Alabama and Mississippi and South Carolina and Louisiana, where you have a critical mass of black people living. And then I think the key really is the coalition that the president put together in other sections of the country. Latinos, 39% of the white vote, and African Americans. I mean, that's because 71, 72% of Hispanics, Latinos voted for President Obama. 73% of the Asians voted for President Obama. And 90+% of African Americans voted for the president. I think I saw the number in DC was 93%, you know. But that coalition is going to be, this country is in theory going to be majority-minority in 2050. So that's going to be a real challenge to all of these political parties, but especially the Republican Party. And if the Republican Party doesn't make some changes, it is really going to be a regional party. And we're in a region where it's going to be regional, But over time, that's going to change with the developing presence of Hispanics in the South. And you can see what happened in Florida. And they attribute the president's most recent win to the influx of Puerto Ricans in Florida. But even he carried the Cuban population in Florida in the last election, although we got as close as one, could have. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I'd just like to say, in reference to the last point that you made, Dr. Bell actually discusses how in the South, in the 2010 census, how Hispanics are categorizing themselves as white, and how the coalition will include, as the brother mentioned here, the Hispanics, the whites, and the African Americans. So I think your point was, your comment was dead on, as well as Dr. McLemore's. And it's funny to see how you can make predictions based on a census, but your census will tell you a lot. It will tell you where you will be 9 times out of 10 years from now. You see a growth in the Hispanic population in the state of Mississippi, then 9 times out of 10 years from now, that growth will more than likely double. So I'm almost, I am positive, and Dr. McLemore, he's aware of this, but I really think the state of Mississippi is in for a major turnaround. I'll say within the next 10 years. I'll go on record and say that. Within the next 10 years, we'll see a major turnaround. We'll see a major turnaround.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. I'm just not optimistic with the persons we have right now, sir. Other questions, comments? Yes, sir, please. Yeah.
I noticed we looked at the map, how it was divided
Yes.
between President Obama and Romney.
Yes.
And from what I saw, the South Mississippi already, everything else was kind of like in the middle, 50-50. But in South Mississippi, it was all Romney. So in order for, I think looking at that map, you know where the work has to be done in Mississippi. And in order to actually make that change, I was proud because they were kind of, so I was happy that happened. But like in the South, it was all red. So I think as far as the coalition, that would be like the place to start.
I think you're right, because I was talking to my pessimistic brother who lives in Memphis. And I said, Irvin, you live in a blue city. He said, so what? A damn red state? Obama's percentage in Tennessee was 39%. In the city of Memphis, it was nearly 80%. So, but that's encouraging. But if you look at the counties, and you look at the counties in Mississippi, of course, along the Delta, and if you look at the Arkansas Delta and the Mississippi Delta, those are the areas in Arkansas and Mississippi, and of course Louisiana too, where the president carried those counties where you have black majorities or fairly close to black majorities. And that, over time, with the influx of Hispanics, is going to change. And we know that, I think North Carolina is still the state in the South where you have the more recent fast growth in terms of Hispanic populations. But it is predicted that Georgia, by 2016, is going to be a purple state. Texas, by 2016, is going to be a purple state. And so there's some hope there. And they're going to be purple states primarily because of the influx of Hispanics, and then being able to put together this coalition again, Hispanics, whites, and African Americans. And beyond 2016, Texas is going to be able to elect Democrats again in statewide office. Any other comments, questions? Okay, before we leave, let me point out we have a lot of free literature over here that the next reading community discussion is going to be on November 29th, Black Greeks 101, a book written by Dr. Walter M. Kimbrough, who is the new president at Dillard in New Orleans. And some of you know that he was at Philander Smith College before he just moved to Dillard. And Black Greeks 101, the culture, customs, and challenges of black fraternities and sororities. And I'm thinking that this would probably draw out a much larger crowd because we're going to get a whole lot of participation from the PAN Council and other fraternities and sororities on the campus. I guess we're going to have everybody here except who is banned from the campus?
The Alphas and Deltas.
The Alphas and Deltas, so they won't be here, okay. All right. And then everybody should pick up a copy, and these books are in the bookstore. And what we're going to try to do is to make sure that on our website and other places that we have Medgar Evers' Mississippi Martyr by Michael Williams is going to be the book February 19th. And I think what we're going to try to do, Keith, we're going to try to come up with some larger posters of these books that we can, at least the cover of the books, that we can place in all the dormitories and in the campus union, et cetera, because I'm thinking that the Medgar Evers topic, because, you know, 2013 is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Medgar Evers, and that will be a number of statewide activities in Mississippi and some on the campus here at Jackson State. And then on March 21st, there's going to be a discussion of Native Son by Richard Wright, and that's going to be during the day at 11:30 a.m. How many of you have a copy of Richard Wright's Native Son in your library? Okay, good. So if you don't have a copy of Richard Wright's Native Son in your library, you need to run to the bookstore and get it and put it under your pillow. So through osmosis, you can absorb this Native Son. It really doesn't work. I tried it in high school. It doesn't work. Okay. But these are the upcoming activities, and then the Kofo Center right down the street is having a Black History celebration, and please pick up that literature. And Michael Williams is going to be a part of a Medgar Evers celebration, because the next day there will also be some activities at the Kofo Center. But please stay tuned. There will be a lot of things to keep us really occupied and busy at Jackson State. Let's give our panel members another round of applause. Really appreciate it.